Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. It took former cricketer Imran Khan 2 decades of hard political slog to win power in Pakistan. It has taken his critics just months to decide he's out of his depth. They point to the country's crippled economy, propped up by emergency loans, despite Imran's promise to end the begging bowl culture. Well, my guest today is Pakistan's Finance Minister, Asad Umar. Is the PTI government strong enough to put Pakistan on a new course? Asad Umar in Islamabad, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
You are one of the key ministers in Imran Khan's government. Why do you think the hope and excitement generated by Imran's election victory has worn off so very quickly?
Actually, it hasn't. If you look at the Pakistani media and listen to the political talk shows and maybe hear some of the discussions going on in the parliament, you might be led into believing what you just said. But in reality, you know, when the first 100 days of the government ended, there was a lot of focus, a number of surveys got carried out. And if you look at the surveys, a very clear majority of Pakistani thinks the country is moving in the right direction. It is moving towards a place where it is better than where it was earlier, and hope is very much in the air.
The truth is, the country isn't going in the direction that Imran promised for it. In fact, the press have taken to calling him Mr. U-turn. He said, "I will be ashamed to go abroad and ask for money." Well, the truth is, that is precisely what he has been doing.
Well, but by the time the government came in, it was a well-known fact that Pakistan needs some kind of a bailout, and I'm not saying that today. I said this repeatedly in interviews to print, even in international media before going into the elections, and it is not something to be proud of. So if he says I'm ashamed of it, you have to have pretty low self-respect to go around doing what the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Finance Minister of Pakistan have to do in the current circumstances and be proud of that fact. The real challenge is the real decision, and that's how we will be judged in the future. Did we take the decisions of setting the country's economy on a path where this is going to be, what I've repeatedly said, the last IMF program if we get into one right now? And for that, a very, very clear direction has been set. Pakistan has been using a growth strategy which is imported capital finance, consumption-led. That has led us repeatedly into these current account deficit cycles. It's taken our external indebtedness to a level which is not sustainable until we move Pakistan to a domestic resource mobilized, productivity-led, export-oriented economy. We're not going to be getting out of this begging bowl syndrome. And in the very first 100 days, we have taken clear decisions which are moving the country in that direction.
Very interesting you say that, Minister. But if one cuts through the economic jargon, it seems to me that what you have done is sort out loans from those who are going to impose the least conditions upon those loans. You looked at the IMF at the very beginning. You wanted a big wodge of money from them. Some people said up to $12 billion. Then you realized there were going to be very, very serious conditions imposed upon it. So you cut the bid to $6 billion, and you haven't even agreed that. And instead, you've raced over to the Chinese and the Saudis and taken their money because they don't impose the same rigorous conditions. So you can't convince me that this is a new start for Pakistan.
There are actually two different parts to that thing. First of all, the sequence of actions is not exactly consistent with what you just said. When I became finance minister, I said we will be reaching out to friendly bilateral countries as well as starting a dialogue with IMF, and we are going to do these things simultaneously because there is no time to first work out a strategy which is your preferred option. And that's exactly what we did. We within 10 days of becoming the finance minister, I reached out to IMF, invited that their team over, and that team did come in. A staff mission came in. They issued a report. We started a formal dialogue. The mission was here in the month of November, and that dialogue continues even today.
That's all very well, Minister. But that's all very well, and I understand these things aren't altogether simple. But the bottom line is the IMF ties giving you up to 6 or 7 billion US dollars. It ties it to some very serious reforms that you must make to stop living beyond your means, including hiking energy prices, for example. You don't want to do that. That's politically difficult, which seems to me why you're so tempted to take the money from Saudi Arabia, for example, where they're not imposing those kinds of conditions.
If you allowed me to complete my answer, you would have gotten the response to this part as well. That's what I said. There is a second part of it. And that is, we have not waited for IMF to impose any sanctions on us or impose any conditions on us to do what we think is required for the economy. In the very first 100 days, we have increased gas prices, we've increased electricity prices, we put in a supplementary finance budget where we increased taxes. We have been, the policy rate has been increased by the central bank, the rupee has been devalued, the currency has been adjusted by the central bank. So both the monetary policy and the fiscal policy have been moving in the very direction of the reforms that are needed. We don't need IMF to dictate that to us for us to do that, because we believe this is what's necessary. However, the path for reform is different in the eyes of the IMF as we stand today versus what we think is right. And that's what the dialogue is going on right now. There is no difference of opinion in terms of what needs to be done. It is the pace, the sequence, and the extent which is being discussed.
Well, the pace and the extent, they're pretty important differences, I would suggest. But you keep avoiding the references I keep making to your decision to take Saudi money, when everybody else around the world was utterly appalled and disgusted by what we saw happen in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul with the murder of the Saudi writer and journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Pakistani government held its nose, decided to send top representation to that investment forum in Riyadh, and your Prime Minister Imran Khan himself went out of his way to say nice things about the Saudis, and as a result you got an assistance package of around $6 billion. When we talk about shame, should you not be ashamed for that?
Well, I would be happy to be ashamed of standing up with a country with whom I've had close bilateral relations, and both countries which have supported each other over years. And I've never lectured on what kind of a system that country should hold. Maybe the Western leaders should be ashamed of themselves talking about democracy, talking about freedoms, and then reaching out into the same Saudi pockets to take out billions of dollars of business deals. The leader of the Western world, the leader of the free world, Mr. Donald Trump, stands up and openly says, I'm getting too much business from Saudi Arabia for me to worry about what happened to Khashoggi. So maybe some of the Western leaders should be ashamed of themselves.
Now,
we are just being consistent in a bilateral relationship which has remained the same regardless of who is in power.
Finance Minister, I take your point about Donald Trump. If he was sitting in the hard chalk chair today, believe me, I'd be discussing with him his values, the way he treats his relationship with Saudi Arabia. As it happens, I've got you in the chair. I come back to the point. You've taken, in the last month or two, $6 billion of assistance from Riyadh. That gives the Saudis real leverage over you, as I understand it. One of the conditions is that you send some of your military personnel to work in Saudi Arabia. You say that they won't be fighting in Yemen, but they'll certainly be training the forces that do fight in Yemen. Is that a price that you, in all honesty, think is worth paying to just get yet more bailout money?
The Pakistani relationship with Saudi Arabia goes back half a century. This is very interesting, Stephen. When I was born that day, my father, who was working in the Pakistan Army at that point in time, was in Saudi Arabia, and he had a meeting with the Crown Prince, who later became King Faisal, who gifted me a small Quran. So this is a relationship which goes back 50 years. It has got nothing to do with Khashoggi. It's got nothing to do with Yemen. Pakistani troops have been present in Saudi Arabia, and we've had a military relationship which spans half a century. And that relationship is not about to break because we may agree or disagree with Saudi Arabia on how to handle the Yemen crisis.
Thing is, if we move beyond Saudi Arabia to your relationship with China, I see yet more seeds of trouble being sown by your desperation to get your hands on foreign currency to save your parlous budget. The Chinese relationship involves a huge investment from China in this CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, much of the money going into vast infrastructure projects in Balochistan. We know that many people in that very underdeveloped part of your country are furious about the impact the Chinese money and the Chinese labor is having on their particular region. Again, are you sure that all of the compromises you're making to get your hands on the cash are worth it?
I'm not sure which compromise you're referring to, but Stephen, I thought foreign direct investment was something which is good. That's what I learned from Western economic schools. That's the economics that I was taught.
It all depends.
FDI is good and it should be sought.
Minister, it all depends whose interest it's in, who's got the leverage, whose interest is it really serving?
What is supposed to be a good deal is where the interest of both the investor and the country in which the investment is taking place is served. Both their interests are served, and that's exactly what is going on in CPEC. As far as vast number of people in Balochistan being furious at what the Chinese are doing there, on our last visit to China, when I went there with the Prime Minister, the Chief Minister of Balochistan, who is the elected Chief Minister of Balochistan, who represents the voice of the people of Balochistan, was with us, and he was eager to have the Chinese engagement in Balochistan increase versus what it is right now. So I'm not sure which are these people who are furious over Chinese engagement in Balochistan.
Why does your government not go public with all of the arrangements, the financial details behind China's loans and indeed investments in Pakistan, including rates of interest, labor terms and conditions, all of those things? Many people in Pakistan have asked you to be completely transparent about the nature of the deals you strike with the Chinese, and the Pakistani government has always refused.
That's actually not true. If I divide it into two different parts, most of the investments which have come in have been in what are called the independent power projects, the IPPs, which came in. And those are investments which are made under a transparent, announced policy which the regulator puts into place. So those terms and conditions, you can go on the website right now and find out what the terms and conditions for those investments are. As far as the loans are concerned, the loans information, there was a lot of mistrust, probably built around the media narrative which has been going around. When the IMF team came in, we shared all the details with them as transparently as they wanted. After the first meeting, I didn't hear any questions from them because there is nothing to hide.
Did you see the words not so long ago of Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, when he was asked about his view and America's view of the IMF helping Pakistan in the future? He said, make no mistake, we're going to watch what the IMF does very closely. There is no rationale for IMF dollars associated with that American dollars being used to bail out Chinese bondholders or China itself.
We'll worry about our China debt problem. Mr. Pompeo should worry about his China debt problem. The USA is the largest debtor in the world to China. $1.3 trillion they owe. What does Pakistan owe to China? Less than 10% of Pakistan's foreign debt is owned by the Chinese right now. 90% is non-Chinese. We have been into 12 different IMF programs in the last 30 years. Why has this question never been asked about which source or which country has lent how much to Pakistan? Why is this suddenly all this much interest in how much money has come from China? Why were the same questions not being asked when the lenders were Western banks?
You tell me that the Baluchi people are thrilled that China's putting so much money and infrastructure into their region. It's a little embarrassing, isn't it, when, as quite recently in the port city Gwadar there, that you're trying to develop as a new megaport to be at the end of this sort of Chinese transportation infrastructure through the region. It's a little embarrassing. At the time you were taking delegates, I believe, from more than 20 countries to look at the potential of all of these projects. Gunmen shot dead 3 workers, injured 5 others, and that was the 4th fatal shooting in the area in just a few short months. The security situation and the degree of insecurity around that region and the anger that I've referred to that is generated among some by what is happening, that's a real threat to stability in Balochistan.
This is not anger of the people of Balochistan. These are activities of sponsored terrorists who receive training, funding, material from outside Pakistan. And is there a serious attempt to try and destabilize Balochistan and through that try and subvert CPEC? Of course there is. There is a concerted effort to do that.
Who's doing that?
So there is no disagreement there.
Who's doing that
but
in your opinion? Who is doing that? These external forces?
Led by India, of course. So is there terrorist intervention in Balochistan? Absolutely yes. What the people of Balochistan thought, that has been expressed through the free will of those people by electing a government of Balochistan which stands by CPEC, which wants greater engagement of CPEC in their province.
Let's talk about the big picture in Pakistan. Imran Khan came to power, you became finance minister, promising a new era of fairness in your country where every individual Pakistani would get a fair shake. The situation today is that 45% of children under the age of 5 show signs of undernourishment and stunted growth. You have some of the worst education figures in all of South Asia. And at the very same time, only 800,000 Pakistanis out of a population of more than 200 million pay any significant tax. If you are to change that situation, it is going to require the most massive, thoroughgoing reform.
Those are the very reforms that we have been working on despite the severe balance of payment crisis. The revenue generation aspect is absolutely central to be able to deal with the horrendous challenges that we have. You're absolutely right about that. The health situation, the education situation needs drastic reform. For that you need revenue. For that you need the revenue authority fix. So what are some of the things that we have already done? We have separated tax policy from tax administration, which is absolutely central to the reform effort. Almost the entire top leadership of that revenue authority has been changed. We have made changes in law which allow the application of modern technology, use of data analytics, algorithms to figure out where tax evasion is taking place, who is evading taxes, to be able to go after them. We have developed these list of high net worth individuals who are evading taxes. 3,100 of them have already been issued notices and the follow-up is being done. The database is more than 700,000. But we wanted to first pick on the big ones, make them an example and then expand the net. And I can go on with 10 other initiatives which have been taken as a result of this.
It's interesting you alight upon tax evasion, and of course that's one element of an accountable, transparent system of governance. Another way of looking at that is looking at the state of the media and the right to free expression. Imran Khan and your government are accused by the Committee to Protect Journalists in a statement released recently of aiding and abetting a situation in your country where the Pakistani army has, quote, quietly but effectively set restrictions on reporting, lines of control which effectively gag the media. In the interests of open and transparent governance, you personally must be fighting that, are you?
The need for Pakistani democracy is a media which is free to express its opinion and get the facts to the people of Pakistan. We as Democrats have a vested interest in a free media.
You don't have a free media. You have journalists who are being disappeared by shadowy intelligence agencies. You have an opposition party leader who is saying our country is today under the grip of a silent martial law.
That's very nice and dandy for the opposition leader to say that. But if in the last 3.5 months you can mention the name of a single journalist who has disappeared or come under any kind of a threat, I'd be happy to know, because I would like to stand up for that journalist. The need for free media is absolutely paramount. The government of Imran Khan, the Tehreek-e-Insaf government, stands by that responsibility. There is a need for bringing some kind of accountability into this whole space of media and social media so that people cannot spread false information, but that cannot be made an excuse for gagging people's expression of right of freedom of expression. All you have to do, Stephen, is watch one evening of television and you'll find out how free the media is, how the government gets ripped into and criticized.
On that point, I just recommend you talk to the veteran and respected journalist Ghazi Salahuddin, who said recently he's lived through the dictatorship of General Zia, but he says right now is one of the worst times I've ever seen for journalists. We get threatening phone calls. We've seen journalists being disappeared. We see an atmosphere of fear and self-censorship. So if you want to know what's happening in the Pakistani media today, maybe you should speak to him.
I will be happy to speak to him and know him very well. I have a lot of respect for him, but with due respect to Ghazi Salahuddin, then he's forgotten what happened in Zia era. Journalists were in jail, they were tortured, there were public flogging of journalists. So with all due respect, maybe he's starting to, his memory is starting to fade in.